Hey guys, now that you have already read over the introduction to cells and organelles, we're going to work through some slides to help us understand what these organelles are doing better. I want you to take notes on page 18 in your workbook. If you run out of room on page 18, you'll be writing about 12 definitions or so. Don't panic, just make a little star and tell yourself to go to page 14 or 15, whichever one has more room in your books. If you run out of space to take notes at any point during this, I want you to make a little note for yourself what page to go to in your workbook and then move to that page to finish your notes. Last week, we talked about all the different things that make something living. We know that it has to be made of a cell, and that's great. But then on top of that, it has to have a way to get energy and make waste and reproduce, maintain its homeostasis. And how in the world can a single cell pull these things off? Well, a single cell does this with the help of organelles. And this is your first definition. All right, organelles, and we're going to write that word on page 18, are small structures inside of cells that do jobs. Can't get my pen to write. There we go. There's small structures inside of cells that do jobs. You're already familiar with the nucleus that contains and protects the DNA, but there are lots of other organelles that are also going to help the cell out. If they were to have a talent show, we might have the chloroplast from plants get up there say, I'm now going to make sugar from the sun, which is a really cool talent that we don't have and none of the other organelles have. It is unique to the chloroplast. That's how it's going to help the cell. We are going to start off taking notes on organelles that are found in both plant and animal cells at the top of page 18, just beneath the word organelles. I want you to write plant and animal cells. And I'm sorry, my handwriting is sloppy. We'll have to just make do. Underline that because these are organelles that are in both. And then the first one is going to be the cell membrane. It is the boundary of the cell and it controls what enters and leaves. Now, I'm going to color in the cell membrane on this diagram. Unfortunately, the color is not going to stay as I switch to the next slide. So just sort of pay attention to what I'm covering in with each one of these so you can tell what I'm talking about. The cell membrane is going to be this outer boundary of the cell. If we imagine the cells like an apple or a watermelon, we've cut it open and this is sort of like the skin. It's going to cover the whole cell. This black line going around the edge is also the membrane. For those of you familiar with Lord of the Rings, the cell membrane is sort of like Gandalf. It is the gatekeeper. It determines what will enter and leave. So if you'll picture, for those of you who know Gandalf for just a moment, picture the moment where the demon Balrog is getting ready to cross the bridge. They're in an underground cave. Gandalf is trying to stop the demon. He's told all of his traveling companions to run. He faces the demon on this narrow bridge and says, "You shall not pass," and drives his staff into the bridge. I won't spoil the rest of that moment. It's my favorite moment in the movie and the book. But the cell membrane determines who enters and leaves, just like Gandalf determined if Balrog was going to enter or leave that area. The cell membrane controls what enters and leaves the cell, as well as making up the boundary. Our next organelle or structure is going to be the cytoplasm. I do want you to write the word cytoplasm. It is a gel like substance that supports organelles. Really, everything all this sort of what looks like empty space inside of the cell, that is going to be your cytoplasm. So, all of this area that doesn't have something drawn in it, that's the cytoplasm. I want you to picture it almost like jello that you could swim in and that helps you move. The cytoplasm not only supports things inside the cell, it can also help move them around, and some chemical reactions occur in that material. If I start going too fast, keep in mind, guys, that you are welcome to pause this video at any time if that will help you. All right. The next organelle is the nucleus. This is one you guys have already heard about. It holds and protects the DNA. It also controls the cell. In this picture, we're going to find our nucleus right here in the middle. Now, it's this whole structure. The structure is covered by what is called the nuclear membrane, and this also needs to go in your notebook. The nuclear membrane is the outer boundary of the nucleus. It does control what enters and leaves the nucleus. You don't really have to write that part down. So, again, here's our nucleus. We've cut the nucleus open so we could peek inside of it. The membrane is this covering. The membrane doesn't let things get inside to damage the DNA. The DNA is curled up inside the nucleus. We'll talk about it more on another day. But the nuclear membrane helps keep that DNA separate from the rest of the cell. Remember, the DNA is like a recipe book, a treasured recipe book that if it gets damaged, the whole cell could die. So instead of the DNA leaving the cell, the DNA is actually going to send little messages, almost like just copies of the recipe card, out of these openings in the nuclear membrane and into the cell. And then those instructions can be used without risking the loss of the instructions. Once the instructions get outside of the nucleus, they are going to go to the ribosome, which makes protein. And if you'll notice, the first three letters of ribosome are the word rib. And if anyone likes to eat ribs as much as I do, you know that ribs are packed with protein, which is super convenient because ribosomes make protein. Now, I can't color the ribosomes because they're just these little black dots. Now we have one of my absolute favorite organelles. This is the mitochondria. You might hear it called the mighty mitochondria or the powerhouse of the cell. That's because it provides energy. And it does this by a process called cellular respiration. What happens is your mitochondria are going to get food molecules brought into them from the rest of the cell or from the rest of the body. And when these little food molecules arrive at the mitochondria uses oxygen to help break them down and release energy from them. Then the cell can use that energy to power all the different things it has to do to keep a living organism alive. The last organelle that all of our living things have in common are going to be vacuoles and vesicles, and we're just going to label this as vesicles. These hold and transport materials within the cell. Remember, we're just writing down that underlined part. If we take a look over here on our page, we have a vesicle that's forming right over here at number 7. It's like this cell is doing a very small process of phagocytosis where it's bringing something into the cell. It wraps it in a little piece of membrane and then can move it around the cell or hold it for storage. We also have a little vesicle over here to the top left. This vesicle has been made by an organelle that you guys aren't going to be tested on this year. I'm going to color it purple just so you can see it easier. This organelle is called a Golgi body or Golgi apparatus, and it packages things for the cell. So when the cell makes something and needs to move it around the cell or hold it, the Golgi apparatus puts it in a little vesicle so it can be stored really easily. The other organelle in the cell, I'm going to color this turquoise color. This is the other organelle that can make vesicles in the cell. This is called the endoplasmic reticulum or ER. Again, this one is not going to be on your test this year, but it can also make vesicles. So, vesicles are used for storing and holding things in the cell, and they're made by the cell for this purpose. All right, guys, that was all the organelles that all of our cells have in common. Now, on your notes, I want you to, oops, we're just going to write this animal cells only. I don't have to write that with my pen. The next thing we're going to see is found only in animal cells, and that is going to be important to remember. So, I'm having a little bit of problems getting my pen to cooperate. There we go. This organelle is called the lysosome. And I want you to write down that it cleans up the cell. Now, you guys have heard of Lysol, right? The stuff that your parents use, maybe you use to help clean the house. Lysosomes and Lysol do the same basic thing. They are used to clean up, and I've colored it in yellow over here on the picture, like the yellow Lysol bottles. Um, Lysosomes contain digestive enzymes. These are the same kind of things found in our stomach and intestines that help break stuff down. Lysosomes help break down the waste or clean up the cell. Remember the other day when we watched the amoeba eat the paramecium? And the parameciums all of a sudden started struggling. And I told you they were being digested, and that's why they started moving around so fast. What happened is the amoeba made a vesicle. So let's remember this is a vesicle here. The amoeba put the parameciums inside of a vesicle, and then the lysosome merged with the vesicle and released those digestive enzymes that just tore apart and cut up those little paramecium until they were just little puddles of goo. And that's what the lysosome does. You may also notice that the lysosome has two circles that make up its outer border instead of just one. That is because it is a double bagged membrane. There are two layers of membrane around these chemicals because if these get loose, they could kill the whole cell. So the cell makes sure it's packaged up nice and tight so it's not dangerous for the cell itself. All right. Now I need you to write plant cells only. The next three organelles are found only in plant cells. Now, just as a quick reminder, the following organelles are found in both plant and animal cells. One is the cell membrane. Now, for plant cells, this is a tiny bit different. If you've ever crunched up a leaf, you know that leaves are a little bit crunchier than like the tips of your finger. We are made of animal cells. They are overall pretty soft structures. Plant cells are a little bit different. They have a crunchy covering called a cell wall that helps support the cell. We'll look at it more in just a minute. And the membrane is inside of that wall. So if you look up here at the number 4, the cell membrane is just inside of the cell wall. And we'll look at the wall more closely in a minute. Plant cells also have the cytoplasm, that supportive gel material that holds the organelles, supports them, helps move them, and it's where some chemical reactions happen. And then we have the nucleus and the nuclear membrane. Again, this looks pretty much just like it does inside of the animal cell. It's going to hold the DNA and keep it separated from the rest of the cell to protect it. The ribosomes are still the little black dots. Whoops, sorry, I meant to use the pen, not the highlighter. Are still little black dots here. And then the mitochondria are just the same in the plant cell as they are in the animal cell. Have the wrong tool again. All right. But we've got some new organelles we're going to add on to these. The only thing we're missing right now is that lysosome. That's the only one that's not in the plant cell that was in the animal cell that we've talked about today. All right. This new organelle that is only in plant cells is that cell wall. It is going to provide support, structure, and protection for the plant cell. Now, I am going to color this thing green. It is not actually green. There's only one organelle that has a really well defined color, and it is not the cell wall, but pretty much every diagram you look up online is going to color the cell wall green. So we're going to go with that just to make it easier for you if you go back and look at other diagrams online. So the plant cell wall is made up of some special sugars that are really stiff, and plants don't have skeletons like we do, so this helps plants stay upright. It helps support those cells. Our next organelle is called the central vacuole. This is our second one that is only found in plants. It stores water, breaks down waste, and I want you to make sure you write down it supports the plant cells. The central vacuole is this really big organelle right here in the middle of the plant cell. Plants need a lot of water for photosynthesis, and they are also going to use this to help hold them up. If you have ever seen a plant wilt, when they don't get enough water, the leaves start to get really droopy. That happens because the central vacuole doesn't have enough water in it. If this vacuole isn't full of water and isn't putting pressure on the cell with that water, the whole cell starts to droop. Then the whole leaf starts to droop, and then we have a wilted plant. When the plant wilts, if it's able to fill up its central vacuole with water again, it will perk right back up. The last organelle that is just found in plants we're going to learn about today is the chloroplast, and it does photosynthesis. And I actually want you guys to write that it makes sugar. This is arguably one of the most important organelles ever because without this one, we wouldn't be here because this is how the whole food chain thing starts. Remember how in the food chain, like the plants, uh, animals eat the plants and then other animals eat the other animals? Well, this all goes back to this little handy dandy chloroplast. The chloroplast is able to take energy from the sun and turn that into sugar through the process of photosynthesis. The plant can then store that sugar until it's ready to use it. And then, just as a side note, the mitochondria up here can take that sugar, break it down, and release the energy when the plant needs it. And this is really important. It's why we call plants producers because they take that sun's energy and produce sugar with it. Then we can use, they can use that all, most of the food chain is based off of. All right, just a couple little pieces of business to take care of. You don't have to write this stuff down. Just make sure you listen. Chlorophyll is the thing that makes chloroplast green. So in the plant leaf, we have leaf cells. In the leaf cells, we have chloroplast, and in the chloroplast, we have chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a special molecule that's called a pigment. This means that when you think about all that visible light, we've talked about the red, the orange, the yellow, the green, the blue, the indigo, and the violet, the colors of the rainbow. This kind of molecule is able to absorb most of those wavelengths of light and reflects only one, and it reflects the green wavelength. That's why plants look green. When we look at a plant, the only wavelength of light that hits our eyes is the green wavelength because the chlorophyll is absorbing all the others and using those to power photosynthesis and make sugar. If we do a quick side by side comparison of plant and animal cells, you'll see here the couple differences. There's that lysosome in the animal cell, our chloroplast, our cell wall, and then our big central vacuole. I know I'm not changing colors, I'm just showing you guys a few things. Also, notice the shape of a plant cell is much boxier, while animal cells are often more rounded or more curved shapes. That's because of the cell wall and the plant cell giving them that different type of structure. As I mentioned before, chloroplast and mitochondria have an amazing relationship. The chloroplast uses energy to make sugar, and then the mitochondria tears that sugar apart to release energy for the cell to use. If you notice this little word ATP and you're super curious about it, that is a tiny energy molecule that mitochondria store the energy from sugar and fats in until the cell can get it where it needs it. If the mitochondria just tore those molecules apart and released the energy, it would just sort of be gone and the cells couldn't make good use of it. So it stores the energy in a tiny molecule called ATP that is really easy for the cell to move around. And that is how the cell is going to get its energy. All right, guys, make sure you wrote those notes down. If you need to back up the video and check anything over, please do that. And then just listen carefully because I'm going to give you a few more instructions. All right. So, for the rest of your assignment today, what I need you guys to do is I need you to work on pages 19 and 21 in your workbook. Those are going to be due on Friday for a classwork homework assignment. If you finish that, I also want you guys to work on coloring pages 20 and 22. On page 20, you have the animal cell. There's no special color requirements there except for the ribosomes need to be black because they're already little black dots. So make sure you color them black on the key. And for the plant cell, the ribosomes again have to be black and the chloroplast need to be green. That is the only organelle that has a true color to it. If you ever look at cells under a microscope, plant cells are green because their chloroplasts inside are green. So we want to make sure we color those correctly. And please don't use green for any other part of your coloring. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening to the video. Let me know if you have any questions.